for something like something as powerful a totem as dragons to tell a story that's effectively kind of re-owning it is pretty great. The only thing I can think of is what J.K. Rowling did with witches and magic by creating Harry Potter. She didn't so much invent a new set of witches and warlocks. She just said all that stuff you knew. They fly broomsticks. Did you know that they actually have a sport based on it? They learn spells. Did you know there was a school where they go away to live and learn? And what she did for witches, I think we did for dragons. We sort of reinstituted a new mythology around them.
When How to Train Your Dragon came out in 2010, I was probably not in the world of film that much, and even animation and DreamWorks. I wasn't really watching movies. My son was just born. My business was launching. I was really, really busy. And I saw it the first time, probably 2014, 2015, when they were like 5 and 3. And I remember, I'm like, what is this thing called How to Train Your Dragon? Like, what kind of title is it? But then when I saw it, I understood the craze behind it. So you and I are on the same page. Probably not into it, and as I was growing up, but I saw it from my kid through my kid's eyes, and still love the film. So no worries.
I mean, part of the journey of that for me is I was involved very early on, and we went through several sets of directors, and I was never a director on it, and very much didn't feel like I would put my hand in that ring, but I was happy to be an executive producer and involved with the very three separate attempts to wrestle the story into shape. Um, and including two different passes with two different sets of directors trying to actually be true and faithful to the book before working with Chris and Dean and realizing, having jousted that windmill twice, that you really needed to make some pretty severe changes to the book in order for it to kind of leap onto the screen. So that was sort of my role, sort of supported to a couple different directing teams, and just really at that bare bones wrestling. How do you make this succeed as a feature film story?
Right. So what was I mean, I briefly read that how it's close to the book, but it's not, like, it's inspired from the book, and there's some things that were changed. Besides the book, because I haven't read the book, so I can't speak much. And you just said that there were a lot of different ways you guys were going to tackle that.
Yeah.
What were those ways that didn't get executed, that didn't come see the
Well,
light of day?
the book is surprisingly different than the movie. I would say that the whimsical tone, the sort of Viking dragon world, uh, is similar, but in the book, Vikings and dragons have worked together for generations. They aren't enemies at all. And they're bonded with a dragon, very early on, and then they train that dragon like a person would train their, war horse or a dog or something. And also, most significantly in the book, Toothless is literally a little tiny toothless wimp of a dragon. And so Hiccup, the skinny son of the chief, gets the worst dragon. And dragons can talk, so they speak English together with each other. And so there's all sorts of differences in the book, and every time we would wrestle with that, it was the stakes felt small on a big screen, and the humor that was so whimsical in the book felt kind of awkward on and trying to adapt it to the audiovisual of a film experience. So it was really a couple of attempts to tweak the book slightly. And it was only when Chris and Dean came, watched all of the versions where we tried to wrestle the book, and they just said, let's just kick this thing a little harder than we've ever kicked it. And the first thing we need to do is tell more of an origin story, not Vikings and dragons who have always gotten along, but what's the story of how they started to get along? These, what would seem to be natural enemies, how did we get to a place where their cultures were intertwined? And that was an enormous gift. And it just rocketed the movie up to a larger story, a story suddenly of two warring cultures that became friends. Now we've got a big screen moment. And then, of course, the other big change, specifically making Toothless the coolest dragon, not the wimpiest, is it was sort of a no-brainer once we brainstormed it into being. But prior to that, we were trying to be faithful to a book and its subtleties that just didn't translate.
Yeah, I think that was a cool choice to make the dragon look cool. I mean, obviously for the film, but also in merchandise. Like, a lot of kids, they wanted to have their own dragon. I remember my son, like, he would see it in a Walmart or something and he would point to it. Um, and that makes a big difference. And obviously the contrasting personalities of Hiccup and Toothless
Yeah.
and just the way the chemistry plays. And I don't know who voiced Hiccup, but that voice, I just saw the film this morning after a long time. And that voice, when he's narrating in the beginning, it's like everybody can relate to the sound of
Yeah. Jay Baruchel
uncertainty.
always sounds like he's going through
E-
puberty.
Exactly, right? So it just taps into that connection with the audience because everybody thinks that they look weird or they sound weird. And yeah, it's a beautiful made film. And Chris and Dean, who Chris just made Wild Robot, which I'm sure
Yeah.
you have seen, to me is one of the best animated movies ever made. I absolutely loved it. And Dean is working on the live action version of How to Train
He
Your
is and
Dragon right
has
now.
been for quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's and those guys are a phenomenal partnership. The whimsy and character comes from Chris, and great story structure and heart comes from Dean. And of course, they overlap. It's not just one and just the other, but they do have their own sort of skill sets that complement one another in a way that was really powerful to witness. And that film had to get going really quickly. It was a sort of, it either is going to get axed and not made because of its struggles, or these new ideas would actually propel it into, what it ended up becoming, a real success.
right. So this was your first film as an EP, correct?
It was, although it's funny, the role I'd played on several films where was sort of a friend to the film and was at all the screenings and in the story brainstorms. But I think the studio gave me this title, which I wasn't expecting. I wasn't called an executive producer while I was working on the film. If I recall, it was actually just awarded to me afterwards when they assessed how much I had participated in the film. And that's not untypical for the way DreamWorks or I think some of the other animation studios might work. There's executive producers, a very fluid title. It can mean that you were very minimally involved and you may be the one that brought the material to the studio. You may be in the live action world, especially like a financier and somebody who added a
Sure.
significant uh, support to the film. In my case, and in a lot of cases in animation, the EP title is awarded to somebody who is actually a support to the directors on the storytelling front.
Right. So what were your role, like what were your if there were any day-to-day duties, or what were your tasks, or how were you sort of working with Chris and Dean, um, managing the project essentially?
Well, especially early on when they joined, because I'd been there for previous administrations, I was helpful to them in pointing out, like, here's what we've tried and here's what we discovered. And so, coming onto a film that already had a couple years of history, I think I was a successful guide to, you know, here's all the experiments we tried and here's what we can show you of them so that you can stand on the benefit of this past knowledge. And sometimes they would revive something that we'd tried and thought had failed, but they'd see a spark in it. And other times it was just really good for them to know, okay, we see how those experiments failed. We won't waste our time, jousting that windmill, and we'll move on to other ideas. And then throughout, it was just really, especially in the beginning, a lot of story meetings as we hammered out, well, what is the relationship between this weakest of Vikings and strongest of dragons. Um, being with them in all the story pitches and part of the conversation with that. And so, by all means, it was their film, and they were very much the directors of it. But as a sort of a senior filmmaker myself, I could just be kind of a helpful voice in the room to brainstorm up what the next steps were. And then as things really got going, I would really just show up at story pitches and screenings to give sort of key advice on, how, given how quickly we had to move on the picture and how much production had to happen in a short amount of time, it was sort of all hands on deck for that one.
So, what was the reason for the production to happen in a short amount of time? Was it investors? Was it?
No, it was really, well, it's really time is money and the cost of money starts to add up. And Jeffrey, loved the idea of the film, but was, as all of us were, frustrated with how much it struggled to find its storytelling confidence and feet. So at a certain point, it's like, here's our release date. If we can't make that, it's not worth making the film because it'll just cost more than we can ever make back.
Mm,
So we're going to keep the release date and we will spend money to make it, but we're not budging on the release date, guys. So work fast, work smart.
that's amazing. And I mean, I was looking at the Rotten Tomatoes rating this morning, 99%.
Oh, that's cool. There's always somebody, right? That cracks me up. Like
Yeah,
one guy.
it's a
Oh, yeah.
yeah, but
But
still, I mean, it's pretty,
yeah, we'll take it.
it's anything above 90 is awesome, but 99 is incredible. I mean, it tapped into the audience in a certain way for sure.
It
You
does
know,
something really interesting, which is every culture on Earth has some version of a dragon. Most significantly, um, China has a rich love of different dragon lore, and Europe, England in particular, has another set of rich lore of dragons going all the way up into the Tolkien era on the 20th century. And so what we realized as things started to really click is we were we were creating a new mythology that stood on the shoulders of both these kind of proud folklore traditions of Asia and Europe. Um, and in some ways now, especially for a new generation of kids, How to Train a Dragon is their version of dragons. They don't think of St. George. They don't think of um, an Asian serpent. They think of How to Train Your Dragon. So there came at a certain point a sort of realization. It's like, wow, this is a really powerful thing to sort of own another version of the entire dragon mythos.
that's actually quite interesting that you put it. It's kind of like how the kids are born into the smartphone era. They only know about the world that exists
Yeah.
now and not before, right? And
Yeah, and for something like something as powerful a totem as dragons to tell a story that's effectively kind of re-owning it is pretty great. The only thing I can think of is what J.K. Rowling did with witches and magic by creating Harry Potter. She didn't so much invent a new set of witches and warlocks. She just said all that stuff you knew. They fly broomsticks. Did you know that they actually have a sport based on it? They
yeah,
learn spells. Did you know there was a school where they go away to live and learn? And what she did for witches, I think we did for dragons. We sort of reinstituted a new mythology around them.
yeah. No, I completely agree. We're so Over the Hedge came out in 2007, I think, right? My memory serves me
Six,
right.
yeah,
Six.
yeah.
And then this came out in 2010. So while you were EPing or helping out or whatever you want to call it, were you developing anything of your own at the time or working on some other project simultaneously?
I had two other films I was developing, neither of which ended up getting made. Um,
Do
and I
talk
was
about them if you want.
I don't know if I can because
Mm,
they're still sort of in that could be made one day. I could talk
got
about
it.
one of them, which was a project called Nano, and it was based on two very different things. One of which is my love of the beauty and whimsy and aesthetics electron microscopy. So here I am with all my telescopes and a fan of astronomy. I'm also a fan of the incredible microscopic world. And so I loved the idea of setting a story in that world, and I combined that story with one of my favorite books at the time, which I highly recommend, called Galileo's Daughter, and it's a nonfiction book that actually has all of the letters that Galileo's daughter wrote to him when he was imprisoned, coming back to astronomy for his heliocentric theories of the Earth, orbiting the sun. And so here was this book about this passionate person who whose daughter continued to believe in him as he was imprisoned for his scientific beliefs. And so I wrote a story about this microscopic world and a little scientist who believed there were EBTs, extra big terrestrials, that actually explained things like their weather when there was a gust of wind or an earthquake. It's because one of these extra big terrestrials walked by. And so I worked on that and developed the set of characters, great character design by Takao Noguchi and some of the other designers. And that project, we spent money on it. We got a script going. So I was working on that, which was kind of codenamed Nano at the same time I was developing, and another project. Um, I was also, I think, at that point starting to work on what developed into a big set of projects, some of the live action efforts of DreamWorks. Sorry, not live action. I mean live theatrical. So the Shrek musical, I was peripherally involved in helping Bill Damashki get that set up. We worked on some Kung Fu Panda stuff at the time. I ended up executive producing the How to Train Your Dragon live arena show that we did with actually life-size robotic dragons, which was an
Oh,
incredible.
wow.
Yeah, we toured the world with a set of, a dozen enormous life-size dragons in an arena show where we took over basketball stadiums around the world.
I did not even know about that. That's insane.
That's worth Googling because you will not believe. I mean, these are T-Rex sized critters. We worked with the creature company in Australia who actually did uh, a dinosaur show with this technology, and then we adapted it to make a a live stage production of How to Train Your Dragon, in which Toothless, breathes fire. So um,
Wow. That sounds so cool.
it was very cool. Yeah. So I kind of toured the world, spent a lot of time in Australia as executive producer of the adaptation of the movie to a live theatrical show.
So they stopped doing that for now, or it
Well,
might
we
get.
did it. We toured for like 3 years, and it was pretty, it was a pretty successful show. We sold out arenas everywhere we went, and then we retired the show because we had been around the world twice with it, with the goal of putting it back again, like after a break. But it would have been so expensive to remount and retool all of the robotics that I don't think we never got it back up on its feet again.
Well, it might happen after the live action release if there's demand.
It might, and they're all sitting in a warehouse in Melbourne somewhere. These, beautiful
Amazing.
hand custom made, robots.
Wow, that would be amazing to see. I would love to see that. I mean, who doesn't like dragons and dinosaurs, right?
And then, of
That
course, my relationship with the franchise furthered when I directed a 22-minute network television Christmas
right,
special. And that
right.
was really a pleasure, having been, at the side of the show throughout its iterations and its sequels, to step into the captain's seat on furthering and continuing some of the storytelling was really fun. And I knew some of the stars of the show, Jay Baruchel and whatnot. And so it was fun to work with them in the studio and to create a really lovely holiday special that I'm really proud of.
That came out in 2015,
It
16.
was actually my last, gosh, when did it come out? It was my last big production at DreamWorks. I left in 2019, so I think it came out in
Mm.
2018, but I'd have to look at the
Oh, that's
wiki.
fine. I was just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
But so, there's all this world created by Chris and Dean on How to Train Your Dragon. Yes, you were part of the feature. And I think they made two sequels and
Two
then they made a,
sequels, yeah.
a
Yeah.
bunch of shorts, including the one that you did. Um, what was it like? I'm glad you brought that up because what was it like working on it as a director, like a 22-minute special or however long time minutes it was, you know, knowing the world but not being heavily involved with it as it being heavily involved with it as opposed to being EP on it with the feature, like the experience of in that world with those characters.
It was a blast, I have to say. I think we may have talked about this because I also did a Kung Fu Panda holiday special, and there's something moving from feature films to the rather large budgeted holiday specials we did, where we really were trying to capture a lot of the tone and look of the features. And by no means did we have a feature film budget, even proportion to the 22 minutes. But by holiday special standards, these were large budgeted shows for sure. And so I never felt creatively, in a box doing these things. The only box was 22 minutes because the the How to Train Your Dragon special, the first cut was I think 35 minutes. I mean, 12 minutes or more longer than it could be. And cutting was painful because it played great at 35 minutes. So getting it down to 22 was like really, really that was the only painful part of it. But the storytelling was fun and trying to make sure that we were adding to the narrative of the entire journey. Being complementary to and being something fans would like to see, in addition to just being a robust holiday special, being something that would be welcomed in the pantheon of the greater world building of the series. That was actually one of the challenges, but biggest payoffs and most fun of working on the holiday special.
That's so cool. I remember, I think the very first non-Disney holiday special, and I could be wrong, was when Shrek the Halls came out,
Mhm.
whatever, 2004 and 2005. Up until that whole world was dominated by Disney, right? Mickey Mouse special,
Yeah.
holiday special, and Donald Duck holiday special. And it's so good to see that, whether you celebrate Christmas or not, it's just because everybody is sort of at home with their
Yeah.
families and, in that fireplace and you just snowing outside depending on where you are. It really strikes chords with people's psyche as opposed to like a regular film would.
It's another privilege in my gratitude for the DreamWorks experience I had. Making a feature film and having the big release and getting out there to family audiences is amazing. And I would say equally amazing is the opportunity to do a holiday special for a major network. And so, even though, of course, television audiences for major networks are shrinking, you're still reaching millions of people who are going to, as a family and all ages groups, sit down to watch and share a holiday special, which promises, if not a religious experience about Christmas, a a tone and a theme that has to have real value and richness to it. So both the obligation, burden, but joy of working on a holiday special is really equivalent to the feature films in that you're making culture for families to enjoy at a special time together.
100%. Are you I'm assuming you're not, but I just have to ask. The live action version of How to Train Your Dragon, which is well into production for a while. Have you been involved in it in any capacity? You don't have to talk about
I
it in the
haven't.
episode.
No, no, except for cheering Dean on and hearing about the ups and downs of a live action journey. No, I haven't been involved. So I know a little bit and have seen and heard from Dean a little bit about some of the things they're doing there. But no, when I left DreamWorks, I left fairly cleanly. And even though I still have great friendships and good professional relationships and continue to pitch there, I'm definitely not involved anymore on the making of the secret sauce there. So,
Awesome, man. I'm in LA next week,
oh,
maybe for a day or two. If you are around, I would love to grab a lunch,
yeah,
coffee,
just
dinner,
tell me,
whatever.
yeah, tell me when you're going to be here. I have spotty things throughout the week, but I'm sure if you're here for at least a couple days, we can figure something out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It'll probably be Wednesday and Thursday, but I'll keep you posted.
Cool. Wednesday night, I'm at the opera, but other than that, I think I'm good to go. So, Madam
Fantastic.
Butterfly, got to see it again.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, as usual, Tim.
All right,
Pleasure
we'll see you
talking to
next
you.
week.
Yeah, for sure. Take care.
Bye.